They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be. I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. I spoke with the Crown Prince yesterday, and he strongly said that he had nothing to do with this. This was at a lower level. And some really bad things happened to Otto. Some really, really bad things.
Why are you?
But he tells me that he didn't know about it, and I will take him at his word.
Why? Do that once, it could be happenstance. Twice, a possible coincidence. 3 times, we've got a pattern. For murderous dictators around the globe, there seems to be a foolproof strategy for convincing Donald Trump you didn't do the horrible thing of which you were accused, even when the U.S. intelligence community says you did. Just tell the president you're innocent. This time it was Trump taking the word of Kim Jong Un, the North Korean despot who rules his country with an iron fist, anti-aircraft guns, ravenous dogs, and chemical weapons, and knows everything happening there, except if you believe Trump about the murder of an American in his custody. But the question of why Trump is siding with Kim Jong Un is second to a more important question. Why does this keep happening? Joining our conversation, Robert Costa, a national political reporter with the Washington Post. With us at the table, Rick Stengel, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy. Karine Jean-Pierre is back, senior advisor to MoveOn.org. And Nick Confessore is here, political reporter at the New York Times. Of course, lucky for us, all MSNBC contributors. Start with you, Rick.
Well, his big misconception is that countries are not their leaders. He doesn't understand that countries have interests apart from who is in governing, apart from their whole history. So he thinks that if he flatters the leader the way he is susceptible to flattery, that leader will be able to do things that he wants the leader to do. But he also overestimates not only personality, but he overestimates the power of a leader the same way he overestimates his power. And the final thing I would say is what they don't also understand is the secret of diplomacy. The secret of diplomacy is preparation, preparation, preparation. They were completely unprepared for this summit, right? Usually, as you know, 99% of the stuff is negotiated in advance. You don't leave much room for kind of unconventional spontaneity. They did 98% spontaneity, and that's why it was a bust.
I guess the difference here, though, is that he knows the Otto Warmbier story. The parents read his first State of the Union address. So he, at one moment, accepted the assessment of the intelligence community and the national security people who worked for him and understood who did it. And then he either yesterday forgot or changed his story or doesn't mean anything he says or all of the above.
I think all of the above. Look, he likes to curry favor with these dictators because I think he wants to be them. And we see time and time again evidence of someone in this is Donald Trump, who wants to have kind of this authoritarianism here in this country, right? He fearmongers. He attacks the media. He politicizes his intelligence community. He does things over and over again. That's pretty scary. That's really bordering that line of like, what is happening here? What is the commander-in-chief doing? And lastly, he's putting us in danger, our national security in danger. When you lift up and you put on a pedestal dictators, but then you shun our allies. I mean, he plays nicer with dictators than he does with the Democrats in the House, right? Or in Washington, D.C.
Nicer than the Republicans. He attacked Paul Ryan last week more harshly than he attacked Kim Jong Un for not building his damn wall. What do you think is behind? I mean, what is happening behind the scenes when the American and I guess that what's troubling is, I know there are no red lines. I know nothing is sacred. But with Khashoggi, you could see the president in the Oval Office one day say, well, he wasn't from here, right? He wasn't one of us. Otto Warmbier, an innocent young American, savagely beaten by the North Koreans. Nobody thinks that anything happens in North Korea without Kim Jong Un's knowledge and calling in the Code Red or whatever you want to call it. What happened there? How does that happen?
Well, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the president's praise and kissing up here to Kim is insincere. He's doing it because he believes...
Let's just put the time... It had already failed. The summit had already been blown up, so there was nothing more to get. They were already walking away from the summit. We all had our emails from our reporters over there that the summit had been blown up before he said that.
The problem is that admitting that he's being lied to is a sign that he's impotent and can't do anything about it. And there's some truth in that. American presidents have been locked in a box on North Korea for 15, 20 years. But
they've never excused the murderous actions of the leaders.
But for him, it's one-to-one or one-on-one. He feels that he can't admit weakness. And if he admits he's being lied to all those reporters, it makes him look like a fool. What he hasn't grasped, though, is that, as Rick was alluding to, countries like North Korea don't have permanent friendships. They have permanent interests. And Kim's interest is in staying on top of the charnel house that he's built in his own country, not making friends with the president and having a nice press conference.
Robert Costa, your colleagues, Phil Rucker and Josh Dawsey, had a Twitter feed that could win a Pulitzer from this trip. And they've written some incredible stories, some incredible reporting about the complete meltdown on this trip. Talk about some of the great reporting in your paper the last 24 hours.
My colleagues have captured the transactional prism in which this president operates his foreign policy, whether it's Russian interference in the elections and his own assurances from Vladimir Putin, and he's accepted them. President Trump, as you detail with MBS and Saudi Arabia, and now with Kim Jong Un in North Korea, has seen gains possible in foreign policy as a way to excuse behavior that his own intelligence communities and many of his own advisors has seen as abhorrent. And so we've seen this president navigating on his own, isolated often, as he moves forward and tries to use almost a real estate perspective on foreign policy, about leverage, reading personalities, as a way to make some kind of foreign policy accomplishment. But he has struggled each step of the way, as they've documented.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.